Today we're going to start off the semester by going into Chapter 2 in our textbook. And we're going to start right off with talking about some of the basic ideas of finance that we're going to develop and we're going to go through in more detail as we get off and running here this summer. So first off, we're going to talk about income and expenses. So we're going to look at what are the sources and uses of our income. We're going to talk about the resulting budget balances that can come from how we use our income. And we'll talk about how can we fix that result, whether it's a deficit or a surplus. And we'll get into what an opportunity cost and a sunk cost is and what role that can have in our decision making. So our income and expenses, where can we get our income? And this comes from page 30 in our textbook, this little chart. So we got income, which is basically any money that we've earned or that we're given. So what sources of income do we have? We've got from plying our trade, from our labor for doing our job, whatever job that is, so that we receive then our wages or a salary. And we get paid basically what the market or our employer is willing to give us. And that can range, depending upon what you're doing and what area of the country you're doing it in. You're going to get paid a lot more than likely for certain jobs, say in California, say if you're looking around here local in Fargo, than you are necessarily in downtown Mayville. If we're making an investment, we can get a profit, we can get income from a dividend that we receive off of those investments. Say if we're investing in stock. Or we can get a capital gain, which we'll touch on in a little bit. Results of selling that investment for more than we paid for it. Or if we're lending money, somebody's renting our capital, we can get paid interest. Then, of course, the opposite side of the coin are our expenses. So our costs for any item or resource that we use up in the course of our day-to-day lives. And a lot of our expenses, they're going to happen over and over and over again, depending upon what our needs are from day to day. So some of these regular expenses, of course, we have to have food, we have to have clothing, we have to have shelter, what form of housing we have, whether it be buying or renting. Whatever that shelter is, we've got to have lights, we've got to have water, we've got to have garbage, phone, internet. Depending upon where we're living, we need transportation. Whether it's a car or public transportation that we still have to pay for, like I said, that we use on a daily basis. So now this semester, over the course of the class, I'm going to want you to take a look at these things. What income do we have coming in? What expenses do you have going out? And the result at the end is you're either going to have a deficit or a surplus. So of course, if our income is less than our expenses, we're going to have a deficit. We're not making enough money or we're spending too much. Some ways to deal with that deficit, of course, well, we've got to reduce our expenses. So we've got to consume less, we've got to spend less going out the door, we'll get rid of that difference. Or we got to look on the other side, and we have to increase our income. So we either have to make more money from our job that we're doing, or we have to look at possibly going out and doing a second job to get more income coming in. And then a third option that we have is, well, to make up the difference, you can go borrow some money. You can go talk to the banker and get them to give you some money. Unfortunately, in the long run, you know, that's going to increase your expenses because we've got to pay back the interest that we're going to have to pay on that debt. And also, which your textbook doesn't specifically mention, we're going to have to deal with the principal, and we're going to have to pay back that amount that is borrowed. And that's just going to add to our expenses in the long run and possibly, you know, further our deficit later on. Whereas, what if we have more income than what we're spending? Well, then we got a surplus. Then we've got some excess cash. Now, as we, like I said, take a look at this semester-long process of analyzing our income and expenses, you know, this is the goal. We want you to have a surplus. More should be coming in than's going out. And then if you do have that surplus, what can you do with that? So are we putting it into a savings account and maybe earning some interest there, putting it into a CD, putting it in some sort of investment, a money market account, investing in stock, those types of things, investing in bonds, and then getting some extra income down the line from those things as well? Or do you have a specific goal that you're saving for? Are you saving for a down payment for your first house? Are you saving to buy a car, etc., etc., saving to go on vacation? You know, whatever. This is what you can do with that surplus. And hopefully you can find out when you do the analysis of your income and expenses that A, you have a surplus, or B, if you don't, what can you do to get there? And these are the things we're going to cover over the course of the semester. So also looking at our expenses, talks about on page 32 of our textbook, an opportunity cost and a sunk cost. So an opportunity cost would be possible things that we could do with our money. You know, they give the example in the textbook is you can either buy a coat or you can buy some boots, but you can't buy both. What's the choice going to be? And then what are you giving up? Depending upon what choice that you make. Whereas a sunk cost is something that you've already spent at some point in time in the past. So sunk cost, as in the PowerPoint, gone baby gone. It's something that's already happened. But unfortunately, with these sunk costs, these things that we have in our experience, these things that have happened before, they can cloud our future decisions. But they should stay in the past. We can, you know, I guess, use what we've learned as part of our future process, but it should not completely overtake our future judgment. You know, if I bought a laptop, now just for an example, I've got a side business where I do accounting and tax preparation. All my laptops I have for my business are HP laptops. And I've had a fairly good experience year in, year out buying a new laptop and it coming out okay. This year didn't exactly go as well. I didn't think I got as good of a product. I probably spent a little less than I should have, but should that necessarily cloud my decision then to never buying one of those laptops again? Or maybe you'll have an experience with a car. Does that stick with you so that you never buy that brand of car ever again? So some key takeaways from this section of our textbook. We've got to understand this. We've got to budget this. We've got to know, like I said, what's coming in, what's going out, and what the results are month after month after month. You need to be on top of this, which is why I'm bringing in this project that I have you analyzing that, and I want you to get in the habit of doing that, you know, on a monthly basis. You can sit down in an hour or two, depending upon how you get the online system set up, and be able to take a look at what came in, what went out, what specifically it went out for. Okay, what changes do I need to make in the future? We've got our wages from our jobs, whether it be employed or self-employed. We've got interest. We've got dividends from investments. Depending upon if we have our own small business, we've got our owner drawing, something that you'll come across if you take accounting for me, or something that you've heard if you've taken accounting in the past. If we got a deficit, we got to either bring in more money or spend less. Very simply. If we're making too much money or we've got a lot of extra money, what are we going to do with it? Then you have the opportunity to make investments. Then you have the opportunity to build up a savings, build up a balance in your checking account so that just in case something goes wrong in the future, you can cover that without worry. All of a sudden, a spouse loses a job, or you have some unexpected medical costs that you've got the savings to be able to cover that. And be careful of opportunity costs and sunk costs and what effect they can have on your future decisions that you have. Next part of the chapter, starting on page 33, we're going to talk about assets. So what's the purpose and uses of assets and various types? What role do they have? And how do we have a capital gain? So assets are anything that we have that has an economic value and can be converted to cash, is our textbook definition from page 33. And some various features of our assets is we can convert them to cash, they can store wealth, they can create income, or they can reduce our expenses. Some examples of those assets that we may have would be our property that we own. A car, our house. Maybe you have a baseball card collection from when you were a kid or that you're collecting now. Any investments as far as stock, money market accounts, any land that you've purchased or inherited. Those would all be assets that you have. Well, assets can be converted to cash. So, depending upon how old, what they are, they can be readily turned into money if we need them in a pinch. So I can sell that car, I can sell that farmland. I can sell some of my baseball cards. I can sell my investments in stock. They can also store wealth, and this would go sort of looking at maybe the investment side of things, or looking at property. So property stores wealth, and generally, for the most part, property, the value goes up. Land that you have goes up. Your house goes up, depending upon your location and the market. So that generally you're going to sell them at some point in time in the future, and then you're going to recognize what's either a capital gain or a capital loss. So a capital gain, you sell it for higher than you pay for it. Capital loss, you sell it for less than you pay for it. And then to get off on another tangent here, because I can, those are handled at different rates on your personal tax return. Those capital gains are generally taxed at a lower rate. And we'll touch on that when we get into taxes later on in the course. Your assets can also create income. If you have property, maybe somebody paying you to rent that property. If you get into the rental market and have a bunch of rental houses, or if you have land that you rent, then you've got that income coming in month after month, year after year. If you have money in the bank, you're going to get some interest out of it. So you've got some income coming in. Not going to be a ton. Bank interest isn't very high, but you're going to get something. and you may also receive a dividend. So if you own stock, the companies, the corporations that you own may choose to pay a dividend throughout the course of the year as their operating results are good. You can also use your assets to reduce some of your other expenses. So maybe your house payment is less than what it would be to rent. And you're trying to reduce those month-to-month expenses. Maybe what your car payment is less than the lease of the car, or is less than, what's this going to cost by taking Ubers all the time, if you were living in a bigger city. And you're trying to reduce those month-to-month expenses. A lot of our assets, like I said, the value is going to go up. The risk we have to factor in with transportation with a car, those values are going to go down the second you drive that off the lot. And isn't necessarily going to hold that value. So we'd have to take into account the expenses that we save. So here's a list of assets from the table on page 35. Once again, just looking at what their role is, whether they increase income, whether they store wealth, or whether they reduce your expenses. And some different things that I mentioned in the previous slides. So like we said before, assets are things that can be converted to cash. They may or may not have real good liquidity, how well it's transferred to cash. Things might be easier to sell than others. But hopefully those assets that we buy can store wealth until we can resell it and we get some profit through a capital gain. We can use assets to either increase income or reduce our expenses and or store wealth. So depending upon if we're going to be renting that property out and creating some income there, whether we're going to be receiving interest or dividends, or we're just using it so we don't pay as in our monthly expenses with a car or a house. Depending upon where we invest, like I said, it could be easier to sell. And depending upon how the value of that property goes up, for instance, something like real estate, or, they had an example within the textbook talking about when Google stock first went on the stock exchange. They did their first public offering back in, I think it was when I was originally in college. So somewhere between 01 and 05 is when Google went public, I believe. And gosh, it would have been good to be an investor then. I'd have a heck of a capital gain to sell it at now. Or if the stock or the value of that property goes down, we got to have a capital loss. But if we're making those investments, we're selling stock, we're buying stock, we're getting into the capital markets, we should have a budget surplus. So we got to be making money to have money to put into those things. The next part of the chapter, starting on page 36, we're going to talk about debt and equity. So getting into what are they? What are the costs and the benefits of them? What are the uses, etc. So with equity, is you're buying or selling ownership in a business. So you own something. Going along with talking about investments in the last few slides, talking about the Google example, it's not giving away, but it's selling shares of ownership in a business. So the expense of those shares of ownerships would be the dividends that we talked about earlier and the cost of paying those out to the other owners who have invested in the business. Whereas looking on to debt, money is borrowed. The cost of that borrowing is the interest that needs to be paid on the debt, and then also the principal, of course, of paying the money back, like we said. So the capital market, the investment market is for equity, the credit market is for debt, and generally you're going to go to the bank to obtain that debt, but we'll talk about multiple forms of debt here throughout the semester. So what are the uses of our debt? Going on to page 37. Well, our debt can either reduce our time, reduce our expenses, or increase our income. So examples of things that can reduce our time would be a credit card, a mortgage, an auto loan, or a student loan. So a credit card reduces time because it's convenient. Gosh, it's easy to swipe that card. Boom, it's paid for. I don't even have to think about it. If you want to buy a house, generally a house is going to cost from, anywhere from $50,000 to $350,000. It takes a lot of time to save up that down payment or to save up the amount to pay for the whole stinking house. That's not necessarily doable for 95% of America. They're not going to buy cash for a house. So you got to take out a mortgage. You got to have the bank loan you that amount. If you want to go buy a car, once again, takes up time to save up, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, depending upon the cost of that car. So the easiest way to obtain that would be to get a loan from the dealership or a loan from your bank for that car. Or your student loans. We don't necessarily have the money to pay for the entire cost of this class or the entire cost of your semester for going to school. So of course you get a student loan to be able to do that. Once again, we talked about how previously how we can reduce our expenses through making investments in assets, the debt that's paying for those assets. The mortgage, the auto loan, the student loan. We can use that to cut those day-to-day, month-to-month expenses. Or we can use that to increase your income. So of course you're going to school, we're taking this class, we're taking our major, our minors, whatever program that you're in, so that you can learn something. You can learn something that you can apply to your job in the future. And through having this degree, having that Mayville State education on your transcript, on your resume, it's going to increase your income in the long run. Because you're going to make more money, for the most part, as a college graduate, as opposed to if you don't get this college degree. And I can't think of the studies off the top of my head, but it's thinking like $700,000, $800,000, $1 million. You're going to earn more over your lifetime than somebody that does not have a college degree, give or take. So if we're using equity, we're giving up ownership and sharing ownership. Thinking about if you guys are going to own a business in the future. Borrowing, we have debt, and then we have the obligation that needs to be repaid with interest and principal. Either way, there's going to be a cost to it. It's something, if you're a business major, you'll find out more in managerial finance class, looking at a business type perspective to debt and equity. But either way, however you look to finance something, gives you access something earlier than you could, just on your own. So being able to take out that loan gives you access to that house many more years before you could save up that money. Taking out that student loan gets you access to this education that you're going to benefit from. Gets you access to that car that would take a long time to save up to pay for. In the last part of the chapter, we're going to talk about diversification on page 39. So of course, diversification means spreading out your risk. You know, they use the phrase, not putting all your eggs in one basket. So generally, diversification is typically looked at within investment. So our investments, if you're investing in the stock market in the future, if you're investing in retirement plans that are buying stock, they're not just buying one thing. You're not just buying one company so that if that company goes to crap, there goes all your money. You know, we're spread out that risk among many different type of companies. You know, maybe some that are more risky, but then more that are stable and are going to be around for a while. So you know that money is safe. And you maybe know you've got a guaranteed dividend coming in every year. You can also diversify your income as far as employment. Maybe you don't just have one job. So you've got your main job, but you also, say if you're a teacher, do something in the summer. And if you don't have that summer job, you still got your main job to fall back on. Or if you have a hiccup in your main job, you've got something else bringing in some income until you replace that main income. Like I said, in my spare time, I do taxes. If ever something happened to my employment at Mayville State, I would have that income off of doing taxes to at least give me a pillow to soften the blow of losing my main source of income. My wife was let go here in the last couple months. She lost her job due to some medical issues, and because I have diversified my risk, because I have that other income coming in, it doesn't have that big of an effect on us not having that regular income coming in from her salary. So just a couple things to look at with diversification. So like we said, don't put all your eggs in one basket. That can be both through investments, both through income. So that is Chapter 2. So the big takeaways from Chapter 2, understand your income, what's coming in the door from month to month, understand your expenses, and what makes up those expenses from month to month, both in your necessities, food, clothing, shelter, all those things, but then what extras do you have? How often are you going out to eat each month? And what's that cost? What are you spending to go to the movies? What are you spending to buy new video games? Or what other? So what discretionary spending do you have? And what does that have on your bottom line at the end of the day? And whether you have a deficit or a surplus, and then what you can do in each of those situations with either bringing in more money, cutting your costs, or if you got a surplus, what can you do with that? Can I make investments to make that extra money, work for me? Look at the benefits and costs of buying assets, using debt to finance those assets. So as far as what benefits, that it may save you in some month-to-month expenses, but what additional costs are you going to have by taking on that debt? Looking at equity and investments in equity and how they can benefit you through capital gains, through dividends, and understand diversification. And that is everything in Chapter 2. So thank you for listening. Please let me know if you have any questions.